Thank you so much for joining us tonight. So the words of Micah 6:8 are our guiding compass. Do justly, love mercy, walk humbly. We are equally inspired by the biblical Aaron, who was known as a Rodef Shalom, a pursuer of peace. And yet, while our Torah prescribes the necessary behaviors and actions that define doing justly, the Torah also recognizes that it's not always clear what that means. Tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, justice, justice, you shall pursue. Why twice? Because my idea of justice and your idea of justice might look very different. So sometimes, and you've certainly demonstrated, that doing justly requires us to break barriers and be disruptors. How do we know when to cross over? How to hold our stance? How to be bold? We've invited you here, as Rabbi Flip said, not as political figures so much, but as change makers and rodfei shalom, pursuers of peace, to share your story, what compels you to do justly, and how you attempt to do it with humility. So, first question. Dr. Rabbi Eliezer Berkowitz, Alav HaShalom, who wrote and lectured extensively on issues of faith, spirituality, and law, said this: to seek justice is to relieve the oppressed. How else are the oppressed to be relieved if not by judging the oppressor and crushing the ability to oppress? History is not a Sunday school where the question is to forgive or not to forgive. The toleration of injustice is the toleration of human suffering. Since the proud and the mighty who inflict the suffering do not, as a rule, yield to moral persuasion, responsibility for the sufferer demands that justice be done so that the oppression be ended. We're curious as to what parts of your past, your faith or spiritual upbringing, if you had one, your experiences in school or life led you to be the person that you are today and to have the values that you have.
Okay. There are lots of them, but I have to go back to when I was a kid. We lived in Jackson, Mississippi. This might be hard. And sorry. Just a kid. They mentioned that my father was in the FBI, and a Jewish synagogue was bombed, probably less than a mile from our house. My father, we could hear it actually when it happened, and my father called his partner. They thought they knew what it might be because they had been watching some folks. And he went and picked up his partner. They went to one of the addresses of one of the leaders of the Ku Klux Klan and arrested 3 members right then in the driveway that were pulling up. And then they knew that there were more people involved. And so the Klan threatened to kill our whole family. So we had to move out of our home for several weeks while the FBI lived in our house and they rounded up the rest of the people involved. So that was my experience with justice and hatred and seeing that some people are capable of anything and knowing that. So that was big for me.
And we can give you a little bit of a breather if you have more to add, and we can pass to Justin for a moment. But thank you very much for sharing that story.
I just want to honor that experience because, we're living in a time where that same ideology of white supremacy and racial terrorism is once again rearing its head in this nation, condoned at the highest levels of our government. And I think that we have to be cognizant that there are people saying we want to take this nation back. And if we're not careful, they will take us back to a time of love and justice. Started going to Vanderbilt Divinity School. I kind of left to run for office, but I was at the Divinity School. But I say that my grandmother, Harriet, and Tessie have more divinity in their big toe than that whole Divinity School. They're the ones who taught me what it's like to embody our faith. My family left the South, actually from West Tennessee, fleeing the terrorism of Jim Crow, moving to Chicago, and that's how I ended up being born in California. And I didn't know this story when I was born until I came back here, so I say that my ancestors called me back here on my dad's side. And then on my mom's side, my family are indigenous and Filipino, and my grandmother left when we had a dictator, Marcos. And my Lola, as what I call her, told me stories growing up of the tanks coming to run over protesters and how the nuns kneeled in front of the tanks and said, if you're going to run them over, you have to run us over. And literally put their faith into action, use their faith as something that was active, not just something that was theory, but something that was in practice. And so that was kind of my experience growing up. But also growing up as a black student in a school district where I would hear white students who would speak out in class and they'll be called articulate and inquisitive. And if I spoke and asked questions like, why are we celebrating Columbus Day? I'll be told that I'm disruptive and insubordinate. I didn't just get kicked out of the legislature, I got kicked out of 2nd and 4th grade as well. And so...
It sounds just like the legislature.
And so, yeah, that's a little bit of my story.
Thank you both. So the Jewish people divide the Bible into sections, portions, if you will, and we read the same parts all over the world each week. So this week we're reading from the Torah portion that we call Shoftim, which means judges. It's Hebrew for judges. And in it we get this very famous line, which I already referenced, Tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, justice, justice you shall pursue. And as I mentioned, the Torah repeats this term, and rabbis and other scholars have noticed this for generations, of course, and deliberated over it, discussed it, and argued about it, and they offer a variety of reasons for why it's repeated. They tell us of the need to question our own judgments. Justice you shall pursue, but is it justice, or are you simply calling it justice? Just because we use the word doesn't always mean we are pursuing the real thing. So examine it again just to make sure that it's justice. That's the repetition. That it's justice and not something else that you are in fact pursuing. Well, this past April, the two of you faced expulsion votes from the Tennessee General Assembly. So let's start Bereshit at the beginning. What happened? Frame it for us in a few minutes. Walk us through it briefly. Describe how it all felt, if you would, and where you found the courage to do what you did.
I guess I would say we talked about it a little bit in advance. You know, what are we going to do? How are we going to make people listen? Are they going to allow us to speak? Our voices had been silenced throughout the session, and, you know, Justin knew what was going to come and knew that we would, you know, kind of be gagged at this, and what can we do when that happens? And we never came up with a plan, but we sort of talked about, Rep. John Lewis and Good Trouble and what they did with gun violence and sat in on the House floor. We talked about things like that. That's kind of how it started, I think, or before the event. And then as we got there, for me, talking to those moms that came up to me that morning before session and said, I just dropped my kids off at school. I'm not sure if they'll be safe when I meet the bus or when I go pick them up. Literally tears in their eyes, concerned as they dropped their kids off to school to come to protest. Some of them had toddlers on their shoulders with them. There were students everywhere. But these were people telling us their fears and their concerns, and they wanted it to be addressed. And we wanted to say, we see you, we hear you, we care about this issue, and we are with you. That's what we wanted to do.
Yeah, I mean, it started with 3 9-year-olds and 3 adults being massacred in school, a place that should be safe. And we were sitting in Government Operations Committee when we heard it. And we were not even allowed to talk about the issue of guns. We're not even allowed to address what had just happened. All they would allow were moments of silence and false solutions of putting more locks on doors, more police in schools, Band-Aids to something that is a deeper systemic issue that is uniquely American, this proliferation of weapons of war on our street. And so a few days later, when thousands of students and mothers and clergy and grandmothers and grandfathers and parents and community members descended on the Capitol, and our colleagues on the other side chose to close their eyes and close their ears to the voices of the people, we knew that we had to do something that was out of the ordinary to elevate and to create tension around an issue that should not have happened. A lot of people forget that Covenant is not the first mass shooting in Nashville. One of my constituents, Shondell Brooks, lost her son in the Waffle House mass shooting. And we know that if we don't act, it will not be the last mass shooting in Nashville. And so unlike here, our microphones were cut off. So Sister Gloria knows I had a megaphone in my pocket.
I always carry one too.
And the most ridiculous thing is that the majority, the leadership group, is so much more threatened by a megaphone than they are from AR-15s and weapons of war that are terrorizing our kids. That is immoral and unjust. And maybe I'm just sitting here thinking about why is justice repeated? Maybe it's so that you pay attention. Because sometimes you say things twice. That's what Grandma did, say it twice. Make sure you got the point. So maybe that's why justice is also repeated in what you're sharing with us. And maybe we need to repeat it at the Tennessee legislature.
So, you mentioned, Gloria, you guys didn't really have a step-by-step plan, but you would discuss together kind of that you needed to make a bold move and to be able to have your voices be heard and to reflect the concern of your constituents and the people of Tennessee. How do you determine, and maybe you don't have an answer to this, but how do you determine what the line is?
It was so easy for me. It was, I was called. I could not sit there another moment. And just before that happened, both Justins were standing at my desk because I'm pretty close to the well. And they had just heard a bill on education that increased vouchers or something like that. I held my hand up the entire time, and they wouldn't call on me. Mm. And so it was just at that point, it's like in between bills, it's let's go. Because they weren't going to listen. There was nothing we can do aside from getting in the way and doing good trouble. I don't know what else would have, I literally was just drawn to the well.
Yeah. And I don't think it was planned this way, but I think that it was powerful that, the three of us represent the three grand divisions of this state. Sister Gloria's in East Tennessee, Brother Pearson's West, I'm here in Middle Tennessee, and all were invited to join, but something beyond us led us to that well, to draw attention to what was happening in the galleries and outside, the people who were saying we cannot have business as normal, because business as normal is the massacre of children in school. And so it was something that transcended us. I think even in that moment, it's not anything that could be planned. But when we talk about the line, I think the line is really looking at this type of the strategy of nonviolence, where first you try to negotiate. We tried to be heard on committee. We tried to have our voices heard, silenced. So what other option do you have but to create this creative type of tension, to force a conversation, to force them to see an issue that they would rather sweep under the rug until it happens again? And so, I think that the line is really putting a microphone to those who are hurting, to pain, those who are in pain, and not to those who are in power, but going to those who are suffering, those who are traumatized, those who are fearful, who are weeping, those who are hurting, and putting the microphone and letting their voices be amplified. And that's our job as as not politicians, but as public servants, is to really hold a microphone to the voices of our people. And that when they silence us, it's not just silencing Gloria and Justin, but they're silencing over 70,000 people each who we represent. That's who's being silenced.
And to watch our colleagues, there were lots of videos circulating, to watch our colleagues walk in and say, and not even look, not make eye contact, and not have a conversation with those hurting kids and those hurting parents, and then tell lies later that they, rushed the doors and that they did these things and that they were spitting. Kids were yelling, protect us, what are you going to do? No one spit. Sometimes when you're yelling, but no one spit on anyone. That just didn't happen. But the lies that were told after about these people that were hurting, it's just soul crushing.
Well, Elie Wiesel, again, Alava Shalom, would tell the story of the one righteous man of Sodom who would walk the streets protesting against the injustices of the city. You may have seen this guy downtown on Broadway or in Vegas or New York or wherever. One day, a child innocently asks the guy, "Why do you continue to protest against evil? Can't you see that no one's paying any attention to you?" And the guy says, "I'll tell you why I continue. In the beginning, I thought I would change people. Today, I get that I cannot. If I continue my protest, at least I will prevent others from changing me." So we Jews have values that are often counter to those of the prevailing culture. We imagine that this might be the case for you as your role as public figures. How do you go about navigating it?
Yeah. I think I wanted to start by just sharing a story of my first week at the legislature. We were actually getting ready to go to the governor's inauguration, and I was on the elevator, and Senator Jack Johnson, whoever lives in Williamson County, I'm sorry, that's your senator. Senator Jack Johnson saw me, and Gloria knows this because it was shocking to me. I didn't even know how to respond. Felt like he had to tell me, "You are worthless, and you shouldn't be here." First week. And it was this recognition to me that, okay, this is the environment. Even as an elected official, they will never see me as someone who deserves to be here, who's welcome to be here. Someone who comes as a Black, indigenous, Filipino, with my ancestry, with long hair. And, I do not fit their model of who should be a lawmaker. And I recognize that was a reality check for me, a reminder that, I'm not here to make friends, but I'm here to make change. And that is our calling there, is that we are there to be a catalyst, to be an accelerant for change that is so desperately needed in this state. We're not there to get invited to the governor's Christmas party. We're not there invited to be a part of the hunting caucus or to go play golf. We're there to elevate the voices of those who are suffering in our state. The prophet Isaiah said, "Woe to those who pass unjust laws that hurt the poor and rob them of their rights." We're there to be a dissenting voice in the midst of a body that is so drunk with power. It's not even about left or right, but it's about right and wrong. And we have people who are so fearful of change and who are so drunk with this hubris that they're even willing to hurt their own people. And when I got expelled, I think one of the last things I said on the floor as I was making my closing speech was, I want to let all those gathered who I knew were going to expel me, because I knew from the day one they didn't want me there, so I knew they were going to expel me. I said, I want you to know that I'm fighting for your children and grandchildren too. That's what we are doing. What we are doing is even for generations that are yet unborn. And so I think that it's so important through every age of history that there is a voice of moral dissent amidst the madness. Particularly in a body like that, it's so important that you have voices who would challenge. And we see that what we're seeing is that courage is contagious. That so many people, I've had so many people who are non-political. I think we've had more people learn about the legislature this year than ever before. people said, we're tuning in. We know who Cameron is. We know who Cameron Sexton. We know I was like, they said, we didn't even know who these people were, but now we watch them and we know them. We know that he doesn't live in his district. We know, all this type of stuff. And so, I mean, people know who they are. And so we just have to continue to, Amnesty International, which is a human rights group, they had a quote. They said, don't curse the darkness, but light a candle. And so, we have to light in there. And I think it's so important that we do it together, too, because we cannot do this alone. Like, we are connected. And this is my dear sister, Sister Gloria. From time we were out protesting in the streets to now, we're not islands. We have to be connected in community that is multiracial, multi-generational, multi-faith. It's so important for us to build this movement. And to also, this is the last thing I'll say, is that Southern segregationists had a saying that the South will rise again. This is what they would tell people. But we come with a new mandate to say that the South will rise anew. A new South is rising, and it begins with each of us here.
And I guess, an important part of that is it's also, I guess I don't see it as courage. I just did what I felt was right and was compelled to do right in that instance. And I hope I am always compelled to do what I think is right. The frustrating thing to me, and the reason I feel, and we feel so strongly about always standing up and always speaking up, sometimes, regardless of which side of the aisle you're on, you try to go along to get along, and you find yourself gradually losing that voice. I don't want to be the one to get in trouble. A couple of years ago, I was the only person out of 99 who didn't vote for the speaker because he didn't share my values, and so I was not going to cast that vote for him. And I was given a closet for an office. That was my punishment. For a year, I had literally an office the size of a closet. And we have to stand up no matter what the consequences to ourselves, to our caucus, whatever, because what is happening is so dangerous. We're losing our democracy. Justice is going by the wayside, and it is critical, as far as I'm concerned, that every time we see an injustice that we stand up and speak to it, no matter what the cost. And I can say I have so many women have come up to me across the country, white women for the most part, thanking me for showing them how to stand up and what they can do, and causing them to think about the times maybe that they didn't and they should have. And so I just am so thankful that that's what a lot of people took for it. And it's literally the first thing that they say to me very often. And so it's just, we've all got to stand up and speak up when we see these injustices and do everything that we can. Because if we don't, we're in deep trouble.
Well, I want to thank you both so much. It's truly a pleasure for us to hear your story and to reflect on our own passions for justice in the midst of your own. As Justin and I were sharing our shared heritage of being from California before the service began, I said that oftentimes people will say to me, why do you live in Tennessee if you're from California? Why would you move there and stay there? And Rabbi Flip always says, because we're fighting the good fight in Tennessee. They need us there. It's easy in places like New York and LA. But I think that we very much do need you here. And we need your passion and your drive to do justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly. And, I'll close with just the story of Honi the circle maker, who, was apparently walking down the road and saw this older man, in his later years planting a carob tree. And the carob tree takes generations for it to bear fruit. And Honi said, why are you planting that tree? You're never going to get to enjoy the fruit of that tree. And he said, I'm not planting it for me. I'm planting it for the generations to come. And so we thank you deeply from the bottom of our hearts for planting seeds for the generations to come in our great state. So thank you.